Welcome to Spotlight on the Real Science of Sport podcast with Professor Ross Tucker and Gareth Davies.
That's right, folks. We are back with Spotlight. The Tokyo 2025 World Athletics Championships are now receding into the distance. Not entirely gone, because the main focus of this particular Spotlight edition will be to look back on that and do a wrap. We had hoped that Mike would be able to join us for that wrap so that we could get his inputs and views on what, well, I think we're a pretty good world champs. We'll give him a rating at the end of the show. But Mike flew to Rwanda this morning and he is attending the World Cycling Championships. So hopefully we'll get a little bit of material out of those events. The time trial, of course, was last week. This week's the men's and juniors and women's road races at the weekend. So he's over there doing his bit on the ground. We are respectively in Spain and Wales, and we are here with Spotlight, which is a show that exists to, I guess, facilitate the dialogue around sports science and the things that you, the listener, are talking about over in our VIP community, which is called Discourse. And you become a Discourse member by clicking on a link in the show notes just below. That'll take you to patreon.com, where you make a monthly pledge, and then you get access to everything that fellow listeners are talking about, from views on Tokyo 2025 all the way to some topics there talking about nutrition, weight loss, training methods, genetic screening, stuff that we'll talk about as we go through this. Gareth, it's been 3 days since the Tokyo 2025 World Champs concluded. I enjoyed not having to rewatch and analyze and so on as much as I missed them. How are you feeling after the withdrawal of the dose from Tokyo?
Oh, good. Yeah, I didn't realize how much effort it took to analyze and watch all these things. So I take my hat off to journalists, especially part-time ones who do it so successfully. It's not easy when there's so much going on to actually pick the little threads out that are really important to people and to get them over in a way that's understandable, especially if you're reading out result after result. So
yeah. And then we miss them. And I mean, like some of you on Discourse and elsewhere on social media have pointed out that we don't do justice to all the events, and that's true, and I don't know how else we could do it other than we have to get ourselves over to one of these championships and then try and do it. Although I think even there we'd miss it even more maybe. But anyway, it was a good week. Thank you once again for listening. We've got one last little discussion wrapping up our highlights and our lowlights and some other interesting things that we may have missed. But we kick off today with a look at some of the other things that are going on, and that means our Discourse Digest segment.
Yeah, we'll have a look at the Women's Rugby World Cup, which comes to its big conclusion on Saturday with the final between England and Canada, which is not the final I think people were expecting. So far, the tournament's been pretty good. As we've talked about before, it's had some big blowout issues with some of the scores being extremely one-sided. But as we got to the pointy end, it's got a little bit more interesting, especially with the semi-finals last weekend, because on the Friday night we had Canada beating New Zealand. I think it was 34-19 in a fantastic match. And Canada, they took the world champions apart, really. New Zealand didn't seem to have an answer from the very outset on that one. And in the other semi-final, although England beat France 35-17, a very similar score, it was nowhere near as one-sided as the score suggests, because I think France really gave England a bit of a scare there. So it's all teed up beautifully, I think, for a cracking final on Saturday in Twickenham, which should be an 80,000 sellout. Well, it will be an 80,000 sellout, because I think I was reading that 440,000 tickets have been sold for the competition overall. And Sarah Massey, the tournament director that we've had on the pod before, she said that's 100,000 more than her original objective. 3 times the number that was sold for the last Rugby World Cup. And it's an extraordinary milestone, she said, that surpasses our best expectations. So it's all lined up there. And I think the final is going to come down to that old saying, it's going to be power versus panache. England's power, Canada's panache. What have you been making of it?
Well, I know you said you didn't expect this final. Who did you think would be in the final?
New Zealand.
No.
I know you said all along.
Didn't we say that I thought that they'd regressed? They had a lot of retirements after the last World Cup, and I think the squad was aging then. And I think they went backwards a little bit. So I wasn't particularly surprised Canada beat them. But yeah, Canada look really good, and we've had some discussion of this over on Discourse, dating back to when the tournament kicked off, because Canada looked really good from the beginning. I think they've looked the best team, actually. England have looked somewhat stuttery and not, I wouldn't say jittery at times, but maybe the expectation on England is so high that when they're not winning it by 15 points after 10 minutes, it looks like they're struggling. Because against Australia, remember we joked that they were, I don't know, 12-5 or something up after 25 minutes, and everyone said, oh, they're being given a real go by Australia here. So I don't know, it's going to be interesting. I still can't see England losing it. I think the quality that they've got and the depth that they've got and the fact that all those players are so familiar with the highest club level of play is going to be enough for them to get over that one. And I would pick England by 10 points. I'd still be surprised if they didn't win. But then again, if you listen to Tokyo, you know our picks aren't worth much.
No, I've been looking at some of the stats though, and if you look at the stats, especially on attack, it vastly favours Canada. They've made like 200 more carries. They've made more meters. They've done more clean breaks. The offloads is quite incredible actually, because I think Canada have done the most offloads in the tournament. They've done 78 offloads. England are way down on 30. So you can see the way that the different types of play are coming in here, with the England being more forward dominant. Canada have beaten more defenders. They just haven't scored as many tries, but I think England perhaps have had softer opposition. So, I think it could go either way. If Canada get another fast start like they did against New Zealand, it could be really interesting if England have to play catch-up. But whatever the outcome, I think this is the back end of this tournament has really been its redeeming feature and a success.
Yeah, the first 15, 20 minutes will be really interesting because England went into the which was played in 22 World Cup down in New Zealand, heavy favourites, didn't win it. And I'm sure that that's there in their minds. So it'll be interesting to see we're at home with the pressure. But you're right. And incidentally, on those stats, I was in London a week ago, and there was a session on women's rugby at the meeting that we had on the Women's Player Welfare Group, where someone spoke from the perspective of performance. And it's interesting, they are very aware of the threat to the continued growth of women's rugby that might be caused by that disparity between the top, I'd say top two, then next two, because I think it's quite clear that even though the semi-finals were a level up and really good games and competitive, like you're still looking at more than 2 try victory margins, right? So you've got a very clear top band, a very clear middle band, and then a fairly big gap, which you see in the quarterfinals. And one of the things they presented was analysis of this tournament compared to the last tournament's quarterfinal disparities and so forth. And there's a perception that gap is getting narrower. I'll be honest, I wasn't massively persuaded by the quality of that analysis and how they're looking at that. But I think it's coming, and the fact that they've smashed every record. They presented some data. You alluded to it actually. The 440,000 tickets was way beyond even their best case scenario for those games. And they spoke also about exit surveys that were done at some of the early games that were played up north, right? I think they kicked it off in Sunderland, Newcastle.
Newcastle. Yeah. You were up in York for some games, weren't you?
Yeah, exactly. And they were interviewing people as they left the stadium and even in the ticket sale process. And a very high proportion were saying it was the first exposure they'd had to watching rugby live, particularly women's rugby. So all the signs are there for major growth opportunities. So I think it's... I think no matter what happens on the field, it's been a successful tournament.
Well, they said there was a peak of 3.1 million viewers watching the England semi-final on BBC One. That's unheard of. If you'd have said that to me a decade ago, 3.1 million people would be tuning into women's rugby, I'd have laughed at you. So it really has come on. And I think part of that is because the game is actually quite attractive to watch in many places, because I think it avoids some of the traps that the men's game falls into of quite cynical and slow play being slowed down. And I was looking at some of this, and the tournament director, Yvonne Nolan, she's pointed to the fact that there's been respectively fast ruck speed. Canada and England completed 45% of their rucks in less than 2 seconds. And I think the average is something like 2.5 seconds across the tournament. Might be wrong on that. But anyway, you can see that the ball does come out a lot faster in the women's game. It doesn't seem to be this cynical play. I mean, I don't know if that's because the men's game is overly slowed down, or if the women's game is just played differently.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to track that over time. one thing that happens in the men's game, and there was this discussion again going on in Discourse, I refer back to that as a way to get listeners to go and look and read up more. But in the men's game, when you have a slow ruck ball, then your better option is to kick the ball away. Because once defences are set, then you very rarely succeed in the next phase. There's no point keeping the ball, rather play it elsewhere. So when the ball is slow, then it becomes very slow because they set up that caterpillar ruck and you end up getting rucks that last 12 to 15 seconds before the kick. And I don't think the women kick anything like that. I don't know if the stats you're looking at have got kicks from hand in the game, but you'll see that's way down in the women. And I think it's an interesting one because I think the speed of the ball through the hands relative to how fast the players run is also different. And so you can create space through passing, whereas in the men, I'm not sure that that's necessarily true. I think they run relatively faster than the ball, disproportionately, what I mean. So it doesn't pay to pass as much. So I think those are things that'll be quite interesting for the game to track.
So your prediction is England by around 10. I'm going to go with Canada on this one. No.
I hope that I would like for 15 minutes to go for there to be less than a try difference between the teams. That would be for me the mark of success. But I think England will win it by 10. I think one of the things with England is that they win so many games so easily that you never really see them in fifth gear, and I'm sure they'll try and engage it. One interesting point actually, while on this, is when I was in York 2 weeks back now, we hosted, or the university there, Leeds Beckett, I was there at the invitation of Professor Ben Jones, and they had a machine learning expert come down from Germany who does a lot of work in football, and he's now looking to contribute to some of the work they do in rugby league and rugby union. And he presented all this remarkable data where machine learning has coded football matches, and then you can start describing how goals are scored and what sequence of events, which side of the field, and you can imagine big data affecting sport. And then we spent some time talking about what rugby needs, and I know that on Discourse there's been some discussion around AI and machine learning in sport, and it strikes me that one of the things people do is they always want to explain what happened after the fact, whereas I think what you really want to know if you're coaching, the thing that'll get coaches to embrace AI and machine learning type tech in sport, is if you can start making reasonably good predictions of what the other team will do. And no one's yet doing that. And I bring it up because there's been some discussion around how will England combat certain strengths of Canada, and what do Canada do to try and combat and offset the strengths that England have. And I reckon we're not that far away, based on what I saw from this machine learning expert, from having some pretty cool computer-generated insights into how that might work, more than just some guy standing with a telestrator and showing you how one line break happened in 80 minutes of play.
That'll be cool. I was just thinking about coaching and things like that and AI. But what Canada have done, they're the blueprint really for getting nations to improve their games, because they've put it in a program for the last decade or so to actually bring rugby through, and only now it's really starting to bear fruit. And it goes to show that if you put things in, you can't just expect success overnight, but it's definitely worked for Canada, so other nations can look at what Canada have done, and hopefully that will even up the playing field.
Yeah, I always say 3 generations. The first one to do it wrong, the second one to recognize it, and the third one to get it right. And then actually 4 and 5 to perfect it. So that's why the 2029 World Cup is being made now among 20 to 23-year-olds. And the 2033 World Cup winners are currently 15 to 19 years old. And whichever country is managing them the best now is winning that then. So it's already, these things were determined 7-8 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So that's 4:00 UTK time, the final on Saturday. The bronze medal match is before New Zealand and France. I don't like those bronze medal matches in any sort of sport, I've got to admit. I don't think the players like them either.
No, I'm sure they don't, especially at the end of a physical tournament.
Yeah, and I don't know how many players France have got left, because they've got a couple suspended for biting and high tackles. They just want to get home.
Speaking of France, their matches against certainly Ireland, and then their last pool stage match, which would have been against South Africa, I think also broke viewership records back in France. So it's not
Back
unique
France,
to
yeah.
it's not unique to England that has happened. And I'm sure that Ireland-France game was watched by more people back there than ever before. They nearly pulled off a big upset there. Some Olympic sports don't have the bronze match. They just give 2 bronze medals, right? That was boxing. All right?
Yeah, boxing does, because you can't really force people to have another fight, can you?
Yeah.
Just to for a medal it, it's lower down. But yeah, I mentioned that biting incident. That's the one real blemish on the tournament, I would have said, apart from the mismatches. I think that was Axel Berthomeu. She had a 12-match ban, so reduced to 9 for biting an Irish player, and that was a bad look. It was. Obviously, I think there's a moment of madness that she obviously really regrets from what she said since. But
Yeah.
French have always had a thing about biting people in. Oh, actually, that's too controversial, but they have.
There have been a few biting incidents from there, yes.
Yeah. So from one controversy to another, we'll head Tokyo wise, because during the tournament, I keep calling it a tournament, during the championships, Sean Ingle wrote an article in The Guardian which revealed that Dr. Stéphane Bermond, the head of health and science at World Athletics, he outlined in a presentation in Tokyo why the sport's governing body believes that DSD screening, or sex screening rather, is necessary, because he presented data collected over the last 25 years, and he said it showed that athletes with difference of sex development, DSD, they were significantly overrepresented in major finals, and it compromised the integrity of the female competitions, which we know, which we've talked about enough. He said there were approximately 50 to 60 cases of DSD in athletics over that 25-year period. And so in between 2000 and 2023, he said there had been 135 DSD finalists, because obviously athletes can be in more than one final in elite international events. So he showed a slide that said that DSD cases 151.9 times more likely than would be expected in athletics, given the number of DSD individuals in the general population. So he came out with all these stats during Tokyo. So my first question to you is, why did he do it now? Is it to highlight why they've been putting this screening in beforehand?
I think it came up the way Sean was talking to me a little bit about it the day after it had happened, and as he was writing that piece. And they'd had an event jointly hosted by World Athletics and the Athletics Integrity Unit to talk about science and medical issues in the sport. And those types of events, they invite all the media to come to those, and then they talk about whatever the burning questions are. And you can imagine there's 2 categories of question. There's going to be doping questions, because you had the Ethiopian band, you had Fred Curley get a whereabouts failure, and then during the World Champs, Curley announced that he was going to go and run enhanced games. So I'm pretty sure that there were loads of journalists who wanted to ask about that. And then the other big issue is always going to be the sex screening, because it was the first World Champs at which that happened. So I think they were probably being asked about it, and at some point, I don't know whether Berman and World Athletics went into that session with the intention of putting it out there. Maybe they'd received a little bit of criticism that this screening wasn't necessary and it was disproportionate, and they wanted their data to show that in fact it was necessary, because if you didn't do it, there'd be dozens of cases over a few generations. So that's how it came out. And I think the interesting thing there is that World Athletics have since the 1990s been documenting and identifying these cases, not just at World Champs actually, because that data set includes continental champs like African, European, North American, South American, Oceania, Asia, and so on, as well as Olympic, World, cross country, and more recently the road running championships. And so they've been pretty diligent about trying to identify them. I'm sure they've missed some, by the way. So that figure that they give is probably the minimum known number.
Well, hold on a second. Where have they got these figures from?
It's their own data. So at every event that they are mandate, run, or govern, they basically have identified potential DSD cases, and then they do doping control tests to determine the testosterone, because they couldn't do the genetic screening. Remember, in 1999, the screening option was taken away from sports. And so sports that were still implementing policies that, remember back then it was, if they identified you as a DSD case, you had to lower your testosterone. That was the circumstance around Semenya in 2009. And there were, it's not a straight path. There were a couple of lawsuits and changes to that policy. The testosterone level was 10, then it was 5, then it was not at all, and so on. But World Athletics were identifying these cases based on various things this is the realities, like complaints, medical queries lodged by doctors, probably other coaches and athletes, physical appearance, sudden improvements in performance. They were trying to identify where these cases were.
So they were actually looking for DSD cases. These figures haven't come about just because of data they had from doping testing, because that's what the article seems to.
They would have no.
assume.
Some of them would have been, but remember, like a very small proportion of athletes gets dope tested at championships. So there's no guarantee that of the 1,000 athletes who enter the women's events at World Championship X or European Championship Y, that those athletes are all going to be tested. So instead, I think what was probably happening is that they were target testing individuals where there were suspicions or question marks, potentially protests and challenges, even though in 2009, after the Semenya controversy in Berlin, they rewrote the DSD policy at the time, and I remember they included a clause that specifically said they wouldn't entertain challenges and protests by other teams, which I read as, in the past, that's how they would identify these cases. And then what they were doing is they were able to identify cases based on their blood test results, and so they could go and test those athletes in that way.
So they've known these athletes with DSD. Did they allow them to continue competing?
If they suppressed the testosterone at the time, whatever the policy was. So up until 2009, it was testosterone below 10. And then obviously Semenya was the big controversy of 2009. Sometimes the athletes would have surgical removal of the testes to bring the testosterone down. Other times it was suppression of testosterone with drugs. Then in 2016, remember Duty Chand, the Indian sprinter, went to the Court of Arbitration, and they had the policy basically set aside on the basis of lack of evidence. And then into 2019, it was the Caster Semenya CAS trial where the policy was reinstated. So there have been different iterations of the policy, but when the policy has said that a DSD athlete must lower the testosterone, those athletes were allowed to compete with lower T. And I think in this regard, World Athletics maybe got a little bit lucky, because suppressing the testosterone, and we've discussed this a lot, does not remove male advantage, but it does reduce it. And it reduced it enough in these athletes that they stopped winning. So, well, not always, because Semenya kept winning medals even during the period of testosterone suppression. But for the most part, it made the problem less severe by enough that it was no longer like a massive drama and they were winning all the medals. But again, like, this is what kicked off, because you had the Rio 2016 Olympic podium, and those medals were won at a time when there was no requirement to suppress testosterone.
So if there's been 135 DSD finalists in elite international events, that's a lot of women who have missed out on medals over the last 20 to 25 years. But there's no redress of that. I mean, I suppose there can be no redress of that.
There could be in some events where but you're right. Like, I mean, most people listening to this could probably name 5 out of the 130 odd.
Well, there's a 50 to 60 athletes, 135 finalists.
Yeah.
But even so, naming 5 out of 50 to 60.
Yeah, exactly.
Why have the other 55 to 60 not been named? Because of medical?
Yeah, just confidentiality and medical ethics and so on, which you can understand. And I wish people were a little bit more sympathetic towards that. There have been people saying name and shame these cheats. And I think the reality is a little more complicated than you might think there, folks.
There's no shame. There's no shame in a DSD athlete.
Well, a lot of people think, and this is where I think it's wrong, a lot of people think that these individuals know they're fully male and they're just going there to exploit their male advantage as deliberate cheats. And that's where I think people have...
It diverges.
Yeah, oversimplified, and it's not particularly sympathetic. I mean, I think one can be critical of some of these DSD athletes once it's known and they continue to want to run and insist on fighting or racing and so on. And you could say, hang on a moment, you have male advantage, but you've got to be sympathetic, I think, to people. This is not quite the same thing as a trans-identifying male coming along and saying, I want to compete against women.
Do we know anything about how successful the screening was before the championships? Have they come up with anything on that?
Only that they managed to test like all but 1%, I think, of the athletes, or screen them rather. We don't know though how many they find. And this is one interesting thing actually, and Dylan made this point on Discourse, which is right, is that if there were 50 to 60 from 2000 up to 2024, let's say, I don't think you're going to see as many as that in the next period, because the existence of the screen will dissuade a lot of people from entering in the first place. And so you don't have to catch people for screening to be working.
So we've had a issue, but hopefully it's a historical issue now, and moving forward we can begin to see some sense, perhaps.
Yeah, and also the other thing I would say is the focus on DSDs I find understandable, because obviously it's affected a lot of women's final opportunities, medal opportunities, and subsequent appearance fees, sponsorships, etc. Like, it makes a big difference to be an Olympic or World Championship medalist over the next 5 or 6 years. It's not that one discrete moment that you've lost, it's the potential moments you lose beyond it. So I totally get that. But for most sports, these are not going to be issues as much as it is for some. And also, I think in all sports, the trans numbers will dwarf the DSD numbers. There are hundreds in the US alone of athletes, trans-identified males. And so the DSD thing it's a real challenge. It's an ethical, procedural challenge. It's not massively biologically different from trans athletes. But the reality is most sports are getting distracted by the potential for DSDs, when the bigger issue is going to be trans women, in my opinion.
And possibly the more contentious issue, as we know.
Yeah. Like, I think by volume, the DSD is contentious for the reasons we've discussed. You've got to handle those situations very, I think, compassionately and ethically, and that's not always been done. And it just creates controversy. But just one thing about that then that's interesting is that World Athletics is saying, look, these numbers show us that this is necessary, and I agree. The other side will say that these numbers show us how risky it is to screen, because look how many people's lives you're going to ruin. And they sort of forget that women also have a right to fair and safe sport, for one thing. And secondly, the screening process is a better way to do this than wait to identify someone based on how they look or sound. Surely you can understand that it's better to screen everyone objectively than to try and target test people based on physical appearance, which invites all kinds of issues.
It's such a difficult scene for authorities to navigate. I was looking at the Boston Marathon. Did you see the post I made about the Boston Marathon qualifying times and the non-binary side of that?
Yeah.
If you haven't, I think for 2026 there are still only 110 non-binary places, up from 72 last year, because the non-binary qualifying time is the same as the female time. And we did post last year, we did sort of theorize that it might be sort of like a backdoor entry to gain access to the Boston Marathon, which everybody wants to get into, but it's so hard to qualify for, by presenting as non-binary. But it doesn't seem like people are using that avenue to get in, or that's how it seems. But it just goes to show that every organization that has got a male and a female category and then a non-binary really has to think these things through so carefully, because it's just such a minefield.
Yeah, exactly. And in the end, you just make choices. That's the reality.
And the worst thing you can do is probably not make the choices.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what sport tried to do. And I think it realized it had this problem 2 decades ago, and then they thought there's a solution we can find that lets us have our cake and eat it too. We can allow inclusion, we can have fairness, no problem for safety, everyone's happy. But actually, no one's going to be happy on the journey you're about to take. And then you see 24 years later, you've had 50 to 60 cases who've infected hundreds of other women, hundreds of women athletes, compromised their fairness. No one's happy in the end. So you have to, I think, hold the line at the start, and hopefully we're getting back to that line now.
Well, let's head back to another starting line, and let's have a good conversation, because we're going to head back to Tokyo.
So I had to play our Tokyo music one last time. So I'm just playing that in the background. As it fades out, we'll talk about Tokyo. We wanted to do, as I said, a wrap in which Mike joined us to share his thoughts. But as I say, he's off to the cycling equivalent of what we saw in Tokyo. But that was our Tokyo music for one last time.
For a serious professor of sports science, once you get a little toy, you love to play with it, don't you?
I think I'm a scientist trapped in a sound engineer director's creative body.
There was a bit of that. Okay, so we're going to have some awards, weren't we?
Yeah, this is our center stage. And we were going to go through. Let me pull those. Oh, goodness. Sorry, bumping my table. Let me pull those up. So there's a few things that came out of Tokyo. We thought the best way to do a wrap would be to just give our Tokyo Oscars out. And so we'll go through these. We'll try and do these rapid fire. Otherwise, we're repeating what we discussed over the 8 days. Best men's athlete.
I went for Jimmy Gressier.
Yeah?
Gold in the 10, bronze in the 5, and yeah, I just like Jimmy, the way he runs.
How many other multiple men's gold medalists were there? It's also these wraps also time to go quiz each other on these. There weren't many.
Noah Lyles.
Yeah. And then okay, excluding relays.
If we're excluding relays.
Just Lyles. It's only the two, eh?
I can't think of anybody else right now.
I couldn't either.
It would have been Hocker, I think, but obviously he got disqualified.
Yeah, so I think it's just the two, and they both had a gold and a bronze.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that people will tell us if...
sure.
Lyles had 3 then, didn't he?
If you add the relay medal
discount,
in. Yeah. My best men's athlete is Busang Kebanachipi, because he wins the 400 with 2 world leads, one in the semi, one in the final, and then he ropes the US Benjamin in the final leg of the relay, the 4x4 relay. I think it was a spectacular world champs for a 21-year-old I hadn't heard of before.
We sort of nailed him as a rising star, so yeah, keeping an eye on that one. Easy one, the next one. Best women's athlete.
I know you're going to go with. I'm going to go Beatrice Chebet.
Yeah, I did as well, obviously.
Did you? I was sure you were going to say Sydney McLaughlin.
I was tempted because I really was impressed with her, and she came so close to that world record. I think if she'd got the world record, I'd have gone over. But you can't pick. There's 2 different disciplines, but you can't really pick between them. I could go either way.
But I could even be persuaded that Chebet was impressive, but she didn't have to do anything uncomfortable to win those titles. And I know that might sound ridiculous because you've just run a 5 and a 10K against the best in the world. Of course it's uncomfortable. But we spoke about this in the champs. Chebet didn't have to do anything out of the ordinary to win those. So you could almost say, I wouldn't say it, but you could say they were soft. And actually, Melissa Jefferson Wooden with a 10-6 and a 21-6 probably is the pair of performances that might even trump Chebet's. So now that I think about it, I'm changing my decision on stage.
Oh, okay. I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, I mean, because I was thinking about the context of that, and I meant to look it up, and then, of course, I got distracted. But a 10-6, 21-6 pairing has to be, because to do the double is not entirely unique, difficult, but 10-6 and 21-6 brings both those world records into her field of view.
There's a few world records that are sort of hoven into view, I reckon, over the next couple of years.
Yeah, which ones do you reckon? In order, of likeliest to least likely, or least likely to likely, top 5.
The women's 400, I think Sydney's going to smash that at some point. It's a shame we haven't got any big meets, but I don't think she needs a big meet to go and do it, to be honest with you.
No, I think it depends on what she wants to do. That's the biggest question for her. How many times does she want to race? How much does she need to race to get herself into 47.5 shape? And then does she want to do it now, or does she want to take 26 and do it at a Worlds in 27 or something? I don't know. It's interesting, actually. Speaking of, Rai Benjamin was quoted as saying that he wants to spend next year doing 200s and 400s, not hurdles. So it seems to me that athletes might try and do some different things next year. So it'll be interesting to see whether McLaughlin Ravoni wants to have a crack at it properly, or if she wants to go back to some hurdles and run some different 200-meter events maybe. But I agree. I agree.
Potentially both 800s could go in the next couple of years, because if Hodgkinson, I think she come off that injury. They said that she had a bit of a cold or something. She'd been unwell. I think that when she's back on form, and she's going to drive the standards up for everybody. It's clearly not just about here. And Wanyoni the same. I think once he matures a little bit, perhaps, and stops running scared, almost, that he's got a chance of that. I mean, it's been there for a long time, that 800. It's got to go at some point.
Well, Hodgkinson stated in February this year that she wanted to get it, and then she had her own meeting, right, that she had to pull out of with an injury, and she was going to go for it then. So I would be very surprised if she doesn't try and have a real go at it in a meeting next year in May, June. And if it doesn't happen then you got to think in a Monaco or a Paris Diamond League where you get a good pace setter up to 550 meters. She looks like it would probably go. And I do think it would be her. It's hard to see anyone else improving by the second and a half they need.
Any other world records you think might go?
I thought
I've got one that I think might go.
I thought last year's 1500 meter men. I thought last year that the 1500 meter men would fall to Ingebrigtsen, but of course he raced 1500 all year. But I still think that record could go. There's enough men in the 327 range that one of them might pull it off. I think the women's 3000 steeplechase could go.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what I think might go in
Men's
this next
marathon.
Olympic cycle? I think the men's 100.
You think so? To one of the Jamaicans?
Yeah. I don't know why. I think this says something about them. Those two, Thompson and Seville.
Yeah.
I think that they could push each other to it. It's interesting.
Women's sprints?
Well, Jefferson Wooden, yeah. I mean,
What's
holding her back?
1500ths or so off the women's one, the 100 meter record, and probably similar off the 200, right? So no, nothing. Just depends on. And the US athletes that don't have to, as we said, in the context of McLaughlin Ravani, doesn't have to focus on a Worlds or Olympics next year. Next year's the year to try and do it, I reckon. Men's 400 hurdles could go if Benjamin has another proper go at it. I don't know what his intentions are for next year, but he, other than hitting that hurdle, he might have come close to it. I don't think he would have got it. I think he would have just outside, but I think he's close to that world record as well.
It just feels to me that we're on the upswing of athletics at the moment. That's why I'm making what sounds like ridiculous predictions about the men's 100 going. It just feels like everything's on an upswing at the moment. We've got a young batch of athletes coming through, and they don't seem to be afraid to try things.
Yeah, could be. You know, Jamaica's the same. There's no Worlds, there's no Olympics. Those caliber of athletes probably won't do Commonwealth, so they've got a free hit at it next year.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next category is overall best athlete, which I went with Chibet again.
Yeah, I suppose by that standard, I've got to stick with Jefferson Wooden.
But it's one of those. It's difficult to pick.
Yeah.
There were so many performances. You know, you could say Duplantis, the only world record at the games. Yeah,
Indeed.
So many.
Yeah.
Best performance. I went. Oh, do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I'll go.
Kipyegon in the 1500. Because it was so absolutely perfect and dominant. We called it the perfect race.
That's a good shout. Actually. Femke Bol in the 400 hurdles did the same kind of thing. But I think it's more difficult to do it in a tactical race, maybe. So I would say that's probably a good shout. Jepchirchir in the marathon. Maybe.
Yeah, the marathons. I was going to come to the marathons in the biggest surprise, but we'll leave that.
That's a long list. Biggest surprise. That's a long list. Okay, I haven't said who my best performance was. Wait for Nikak in the 400 relay. I'm only saying that because I forgot to mention earlier. It was one of the things in our final episode, we tried to get the splits for that men's 4x4 relay, but the splits that were available to us at the time didn't have South Africa's times, which is a shame. But I want to say thanks to Karina. And actually, a couple of people shared this also with me over on our Instagram page. And he ran a 43.27 split in that 4x400 relay, which in those conditions, because remember, their ankles were basically in the water. It was raining so heavily and inside lane one. It took South Africa from 1.8 seconds behind the US to within half a second on one leg. And that then set up our anchor leg to run, well, almost chase back the USA, but we ended up with a bronze medal thanks to that performance. But a 43.27, and for Nikak's interesting because he almost made the 200-meter final. Remember, he was sitting on the qualification hot seat until the third of the three semi-finals, and then he got displaced by another South African. So you could say he's in the top 10 in the world in the 200 now, and that 400 is, it was 7-8 years ago that he ruptured that ACL playing a rugby halftime charity game. What a costly... Has there ever been such a costly mistake to a track and field athlete?
No, you've said that before, and now you think he's in the wrong event.
Well, it's surprising to me that he was in the two. Is that his commitment? He wants to finish his career in the 200. Is he done with the 4? Because when you've scored a 43.2, no one else ran 43.9 on that day. No. So give it a go, like 2027 and 28, and then retire in Los Angeles and try and get back to where you were in the 400. Anyway, so I just wanted to bring that in. It's not really my best performance. I'll say Sydney McLaughlin-Roney because that 400 world record, I said she wouldn't go under 48, and she went 47.8. So I think that's got to be mine.
Mm-hmm. We've got the best comeback.
In the literal and figurative sense, Cole Hocker.
Oh, to bounce back from his disqualification.
And to come from 12th to 1st in the last 350 meters.
Yeah, okay.
But
that's a good answer. I'll give you that one.
Literally and figuratively. But I also want to say Kebenachipi, Colin Busang Kebenachipi for catching Rai Benjamin in the last 100 of the 4x4.
Mm-hmm. A very short-term comeback.
Yes.
I'm looking at a long-term comeback. And actually, I'm going to give it to Keely Hodgkinson. Because we've got to remember that she's been out for an entire year and came back. And although she didn't win gold, it wasn't her fault. She got overhyped by the media to come back and get a bronze medal after all that. I think that's a pretty good comeback. And the other one, because I've got two, is the men's javelin, Keyshawn Watson, who got his Walcott, Olympic gold in 2012.
That's a good shout.
And got a gold 13 years later.
That's a good shout, actually.
Yeah,
there were a few remarkable performances and longevity achievements. That's got to be right up there with them, right?
Katzenberg apparently threw the hammer furthest it's ever been thrown for 20 years as well.
Oh yeah, that was one of the things someone pointed out to me, where we given short shrift to a field event, and I can only say you're right.
Yeah, I mean, I said that on Discourse when I wrapped it up. I said one of the wishes I had was that we could cover the field events better.
Yeah.
But it's a lack of time. But it's also a lack of knowledge, and it's difficult to speak about things you have absolutely no clue about.
Yeah,
compared to very little clue as I have.
Difficult enough to
speak
about
we have
the
got the
things you do know
category
about.
biggest surprise, which I've got everything.
Yeah, I was doing a list of this. If you went through and again, having just said we wished we could do more field events, we're now not going to do field events for the next while. But on the track, which favourites in the men actually won?
Lyle's in the 200.
Yep.
Wanyoni was probably the favourite in the 800.
Yeah, I'd have made him the favourite. You never pick him against the field, but he was definitely in the field. He was the favourite.
And then the others were too open. I don't even know who the favourites would have been. It wouldn't have definitely been Gracia.
Well, no, but I think you could say
Steeplechase was Beamish. That was right out there.
I think reasonably you can add the 110 hurdles to it, because Cordell Tench was always going to be the world leader. He was always the favourite there, as like he had 3 out of the top 4 times in the world coming in. So he's the other one. And then I think Rai Benjamin was probably the favourite in my eyes, but I think most people wouldn't have made him the favourite, so that one probably doesn't count either, right? So only three track events went to the favourites in the men. In the women's, it was a little bit more predictable, because the 1 and the 200 went as expected to Jefferson Wooden, the 400 to McLaughlin, the hurdles to Bowl, the 1500 to Kipyego, and the 5 and the 10 to Chebet. So I think on the women's side, the track events were a little bit more predictable, but on the men's side, it was just like anyone's guess who was winning those.
Do you know who we've undersold? And I meant to mention, with 2 golds, is the race Walker Perez.
Yeah, but that's the same problem as like
this is the problem with the field events, isn't it?
Yeah, and they were too early in the morning. I couldn't watch them. I wasn't watching them in morning time Tokyo. No chance.
So anyway, that wasn't a big surprise. Yeah, my biggest surprise were the 2 marathons actually finishing in sprint finishes, I think.
Yeah.
But, who's it? Alphonse Simbu of Tanzania beating Petros of Germany by the 300ths of a second in a marathon.
That's the best marathon finish I've ever seen.
Yeah, and it goes to show, because I watched a bit of Berlin on Sunday, and a man running against the clock just isn't interesting.
Yawn.
Even if he might be on for a world record, which he wasn't. Yeah, that was yawn.
Yeah, I saw some tweets about Sebastian Sawyer's on course for the world record at halfway, and then I was out at a coffee shop, and I had no desire to come back and see it.
No, I sent you the link, and I wondered if you were going to watch it, and no, you didn't miss anything, because by the time I got onto it, it was like he was fading anyway.
Because the way I figure is, even if he breaks the world record, I can watch the last 20 minutes of it later again. Like, it doesn't intrigue me anything like that men's marathon. There were 20 guys at halfway. There were 12 with 7 Ks to go at the 35K mark, and the pace was being pushed. There were guys getting dropped off and coming back. The Canadian, I think it was Levens. There was so much intrigue, and then the way that it finished with 3 guys coming into the stadium, 2 guys over the final 200. I think one of the best events, certainly the best marathon finish I've seen. was superb.
Oh yeah, 100%. So we
Um,
had your biggest surprise. Everything or nothing? As it
uh,
all was.
some honourable mentions. The women's javelin went to Ecuador's. Oh, I wrote the name down somewhere now. I've misplaced it again. But that's got to be one of the biggest surprises, right? Here we go. Julicy Angulo winning javelin gold for Ecuador. Massive surprise. I reckon the biggest outsider. The 800 women gold must be a surprise, even though she'd run. This Lilian Adira had run the time 156 behind Hodgkinson earlier this year in Poland. I still think very few people would have picked her. She wouldn't even been the first Kenyan you picked, never mind the winner of the race. So there was that one. But my biggest surprise probably goes in that men's 1500 to Isaac Nada. And I say that with deference to the fact that he was in the top 10 ranked in the world. So he's clearly not like a rank outsider. But we had looked at that event as being 7 athletes coming in, and it was going to be one of those 7. Couldn't wait to see the battle between them. And in the end, we didn't even see those 7 in the same race. And he trumped all 7 of them. So that would be mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough. I'll give you that one.
Best,
So, final
one
winners
category.
and losers.
Sorry, one category I didn't put in there, and we also do it now. What was the best event?
Oh, the marathons.
Not that men's 8. I remember at the time we said that was the best event.
Yeah, when you say best event, it's difficult. I mean, yeah, I suppose because the marathons I sort of watched the I said the women's 400, but I think probably the men's 8 just because of that finish. Just because of the look on his face as he came round that back bend and then managed to hang on.
Yeah,
That's good to watch.
For me, it's the men's 8.
Drama.
For me, it's the men's 8. I would also give obviously that men's marathon we said. The women's marathon was probably the most competitive women's event. The women's 400, as you said, Paulinho's closeness to Sydney McLaughlin-Moroney was a real surprise to me, actually. I knew that she was good, but for her to also go under 48 was remarkable, and I'm quite excited about what that means for the event. Plus the fact that they had a bit of beef afterwards, I think is good. And Paulinho will race a lot next year. She'll go again, so I'm interested to see how that goes. So that's the one. It's speaking of the very few women's events were really competitive. Kipyegon dominated, Bol dominated, Jefferson Wooden won her 100 meter and 200 meter titles by more than the men's marathon was won. That's how dominant that was. No one even broke 22 seconds in that women's 200 other than her, and she was 0.4 under it. So that's pretty astonishing dominance, actually. The 5 and the
3 of the relays were just walkovers.
The 5 and the 10 were dominated by Chebet, even though they were kick sprint finishes, but there was no jeopardy in those results once she put her foot down. So yeah, women's wasn't particularly close on the track. The men's produced more thrilling finishes, I think, than the women's did.
So yeah, winners and losers then, we said, compared to expectations.
Yeah.
So my winners country-wise, Ireland and New Zealand, who both punched above their weight, perhaps not in terms of medals, so New Zealand got a few and Ireland only got the silver in the heptathlon. But I think there were so many close and good results from those two countries. It was it's good to see them coming through. And on the flip side, my losers are probably Great Britain, who, despite all the funding and all the hype going in, had a pretty dismal time. And as usual, the press have turned on them and have gone from like heroes to zeros pretty quickly, as happens in this country, unfortunately.
It's crazy how quickly that happens there. Like, because I agree, they're a clear and obvious nominee for the biggest losers relative to expectations. You said Ireland got the 1 medal, but yeah, it was only the heptathlon. But you're right, they got the guy in the 800, Phillips. Oh, what was his name?
They had Kate O'Connor won silver in the heptathlon, and then Cian McPhillips, he had a 4th in the 800.
Yeah, in a
and
crazy
they had
fast time.
Andrew Coscaran, he came the first Irish finalist in the men's 1500 since 2011. They had Fiona McCormack, whose name it's not Fiona.
Fiona.
Yeah. She came 9th in the marathon. 10th, they had Sarah Healy in the 1500. They had 4 top 10 finishes overall and further 9 top 20s. And what it shows is that I think Ireland are improving. So I asked Joe Warren about this, and he put a post on Discourse before I even asked him.
Yeah, I saw that.
And he said he thinks it's a collection of things combined with momentum. that's making a difference. He says Ireland have invested heavily in a Sport Island campus with expert services for athletes, right from indoor training venues to physiology, nutrition, strength and conditioning support. And historically, all these services were the responsibility of the athlete, and there was no main centre. And apparently, this is nothing to do with Athletics Ireland, who it says they've been very lucky. It's made them look good, but in a recent independent review, it's not Athletics Ireland who've been pushing it. It's the Irish Institute of Sport. And he said, secondly, a huge amount of our athletes are now moving abroad and training with larger professional groups. And it's the opportunities that are coming in, and it creates a collective interest in the sport that motivates new athletes. And so it's like a snowball effect of the country slowly building up, which is interesting to see. And it'll be interesting to see now how Ireland push on from this. They've had a bit of success. Will the kids see it? And then, as you said before, it takes a couple of generations for it to really take off. But it shows how if you invest in sport at the right time, it'll pay off down the line.
Yeah, exactly. And you can do it in targeted ways, because the other country that I'd put on my winners list is Botswana, because, okay, we've already spoken about their 400 and their 4x400. Letsile Tebogo maybe false start in the 100, not a highlight for him. But and in fact, he'll be one of the most disappointed athletes going away from Tokyo, because he false started the 1 and ended up off the podium in the 2. So actually, that's a pretty disappointing World Championships for him. But for Botswana collectively, if you look at the athletes they've now got in the 1500, they've got 800-meter athletes. They've always had reasonably good 2 and 4 athletes. And that's another example. Like, it's not a resource-rich country, yet they've invested and they're finding these athletes. And similar to what Joe says about Ireland, a lot of those Botswanan athletes then come down south to South Africa, where we have facilities, and they've got clearly good athletes, just good raw materials that can be refined in those different environments. So yeah, they would be a winner. Just on the UK or Great Britain rather, I saw them saying the goal was 5 to 8 medals, and they got 5. The big problem was that none of them were gold. But then I was thinking, like, who were they really expecting to get gold? Hodgkinson's the obvious one. Josh Kerr in the 1500. They had a pole vaulter get an Achilles tendon injury or an ankle ligament. It was something in the lower limb.
Molly Caudry.
That was in the warm-ups. But it feels to me like all the others that they were thinking of, Karras in the marathon, that like a lot can go wrong in the marathon, so you wouldn't ever bank on it. Kerr in the 1500, he was against like an unbelievably competitive field. In the end, they had Whiteman actually get one of their medals in that event, so maybe they would have thought they'd get 2. But it felt a little bit ambitious to me, though they did get 10 in Budapest, which was the highest ever. So they've gone from their best ever to their worst since 2003, and none in the relays, which I think was a particular problem, because they could have gotten to 8 if they picked up 3 out of the 4 relay medals, 3 out of 5 relay medals. Another big loser would be Norway, who would bank on 3 medals, Warholm, Ingebrigtsen, and in the end they had none, not 1 medal.
Yeah. What are the other, is African distance men's running? Seems to be on the slide.
Big time. Because Kenya, women, in fact, I looked at that, second in the medal table, but the split is almost entirely women. Their men got 1 gold and 2 bronze, and their women got 6 gold and 2 silver. Swept the distances, as we pointed out in our last podcast.
Yeah, 100% that.
And Ethiopia, even worse, I think. Like, Ethiopian men used to clean up the 5 and the 10. There were times that they'd win 2 out of the 3 medals in both distances, 4 out of 6 distance medals, and they're not doing that anymore either. So there has been a definite shift there, which is interesting.
Pop quiz. Which countries won their first ever World Championship medals?
So I know Samoa won 1, because we sort of guessed that this would be the case. That was in the men's discus.
Mm-hmm.
New Zealand,
3
no,
more.
because Valerie Adams would have won many for them before.
Women's marathon.
Oh, the 3rd place, Uruguay.
Uruguay, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Men's marathon.
Okay, so that would be the winner.
Simbu that's the first ever gold for Tanzania.
Yeah, Tanzania, because they would have won golds on the track, either in the 8 or the 400 hurdles before.
The first ever gold, yeah. And then St. Lucia, and I should have checked, but I don't know who won a medal from St. Lucia.
Would that not be the triple jumper? The same. This happened in Paris as well. Le Fond.
Oh, possibly, yes. Yeah,
I think
should have looked this up.
I think so. I'm gonna look it up now as we talk. Another No, St. Lucia's Julian Alfred. How silly are we? Dominica is listeners shouting at
I'll
us
leave you
as they
look that up.
listen to
How
this.
about Japan? Did they get many medals? They had 2 bronze, was it?
Yes, both race
Would that be
walkers. So
disappointing for Japan?
that's disappointing. Quickly step back. Dominica, the Commonwealth of Dominica is Tia Lafonda in the triple jump. St. Lucia is Julian Alfred in the 100. We should have known that.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah,
That's their
Japan
first
Japan
medal.
would be disappointed with that. None on the track. They did, however, win a gold in the media 800 meter race.
In the media.
Yeah, there's a. I don't know if you know this. You should know this because if we ever go to a World Champs or Olympics, you are running the 800 on our behalf.
I'm older than you. You got to send the youngest athlete.
Yeah, but I'm invoking founders' rights and also cycling rights. If there's a if there's a bike race, I'll do it. But you can do it. I back you. The winner of the media 800 in Tokyo is a guy called Masato Yokota, 155.
Yeah, I've got no hope, but it's going to embarrass us. I'll probably rupture my Achilles tendons. I'll save ourselves for our bike race against Lantern Rouge, which I still reckon you ought to organise.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You and me against Benji and Patrick. It's on.
Yeah.
I'll try.
Smoke them. You've got to say that the USA had a pretty good time of it overall.
Yeah, the only exception is USA men's distance. And I know Cole Hocker sort of redeemed that. But I reckon they'd have gone in there between their marathon runners, Fisher, Young, in the 5 and the 10. They would have fancied a little bit more success than they got. So maybe that's a little bit of a blemish. But you're right. They were fantastic. I think they won every relay.
No, they lost the men's 4x4.
Oh, yes, of course.
Otherwise, it would have been a clean. Has there ever been a clean sweep of relays?
I'm pretty sure they would have swept them before.
Yeah, we'll have to check that. And I'll take this opportunity to actually mention Dennis, who sent me a message. Dennis sends me a lot of message. Dennis from Canada. He said, is Ross deliberately trying to wind up the Canadian listeners by continuing to refer to Americans being tops in circular throwing events?
I have memories that was not me. It was you that said that. But
well, he's getting the blame. Anyway, sorry, Dennis, I haven't replied to your message yet. But yeah, you've got the reply from Ross online there.
What happened
He
there,
said,
though? What happened there, though, Dennis, is that we theorized that Americans were good at spinning around and throwing things, and then the very next day, Canadians won the hammer. And so we had to fit the facts to our theory. That's what happened there.
Mm. He actually said, he did make a good point. He said Arup ran bravely, but not as brave as well as Wanyoni. And that's true, because I'd written Arup off, and he did well.
He got progressively better and better, because he didn't
as
look good.
As it went on, didn't he?
He didn't look good coming in, actually. He looked, even in the Diamond Leagues, he didn't look like the same athlete that we saw in May and June. And so, I don't know what happened with his planning of his season, but he seemed to find something when he needed to anyway.
Yep. So, any more comments on that before I move on to another Tokyo-related post, but a bit more of a...
No, but let's give it a rating out of 10.
I give it a 9.
Wow.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I thought it was intriguing. It wasn't just a walkover. There was so much going on. And I think because, as I said on Discourse, because I had to follow it in such depth because of covering it, I really took the most out of it. And so, yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was superb.
Yeah, I was going to give it an 8. I can see why you'd go 9. And mine, I have to try hard not to be like affected by because I mean some of the finals I was watching in airport immigration queues and standing on side of baggage carousel waiting for my bike to arrive in an airport. So my personal experience of it was compromised a little bit, and the time zones make it difficult to try and squeeze everything in. But I'd still give it an 8 because it was just so unpredictable and open. And
I nearly forgot was our prediction contest on Discourse, which I've just got to give a mention. Because it was organised. Thank you very much for Mike and Madison for organising the prediction contest. That's a father and daughter team, and the bragging rights in the household now go to Madison. You absolutely smashed everybody else by a wide margin with her predictions. Well done, Madison. Make sure your dad, buys you more than coffee for that.
Yeah, thanks very much to Mike and Madison for doing that. That's it gives so many people a really different perspective on what's happening when you actually have a horse in the race. What one medalist was picked by nobody? Did anyone pick Nada, for instance?
No, I'm pretty sure Mike did say in the thread there were quite a few, actually. I don't think anybody had Grecia either. There were so many.
Because someone picked the men's marathon winner, but maybe not to win, but to get a medal, Simbu, right? I think I saw that on Discourse, so that's a good pick.
Yeah,
So I
that
wonder
would
what
be a
the
hell of a pick.
rarest correct pick was.
I don't know. Perhaps you go and have a look at the stats. Go and have a look, Mike. Yeah, Paul Landberg came second and Neil S came third, just to mention that. And I've just got to mention I beat you overall because you can pick the big events, but you don't know anything about the minor events. Like I
I
really looked into them and
I
just
picked
guessed.
I picked some people to win minor events that didn't even compete. That's how badly my and
Okay.
when we say minor events, we mean minor to us. Please don't
Yeah,
attack
yeah,
us
we'll get
for saying
bombed
that.
again. Yeah, here we go
Um,
again.
but I
We've already.
genuinely I picked people and then I looked at the results. The guy didn't even start the event. Like, come on,
Just
it's
excuses. I
terrible,
beat you.
terrible.
Take it. Anyway, we'll move on to Ross replies, and it's about Tokyo. And it came from Neil. He said, picking up on a comment Ross made in one of the last podcasts, probably paraphrases slightly, but I think the gist is that you rarely see athletes doubling up at the 400 and 800 meters anymore because of the different energy systems. And there's a second part to it as well, is that you don't see the 1500, 5000 being so common now, where it used to be quite common apparently. So why do you think that these doubling up of these events has sort of swapped over?
Just on that, you don't see the 8-15 combo anymore, but you see the 15-5,
Hmm.
right?
Oh, sorry, yeah,
Yeah,
sorry, I've
yeah,
got it
yeah.
the wrong way around here.
So the first, it was really interesting, and I remember throwing it out there when we spoke about what was it, the 800 gold, or I can't remember the exact context, but I remember mentioning it and saying that the energy systems are different enough, whereas once you get above 800 meters, like the aerobic contribution or the oxygen dependent contribution is large enough that you get lots of transitions. And that's why, for instance, you'll see good 1500 meter performances in athletes who then go on to be very good marathon runners, and vice versa. You think about like guys who could run 332 1500s and 204 205 marathons. But the opposite it's very rare, and the only ones like I can think of are Juan Terrena from Cuba. And on the women's side, actually, and I was going to make a joke about this and I missed the opportunity, one of the losers from Tokyo was Jarmila Kratochvilova, because Kratochvilova used to hold the 400 meter and the 800 meter championship records, and both of those were broken in Tokyo. So one by McLaughlin Ravoni and one by Odira in the 800. But it's hard to think of many other 4-8 combinations. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the energy system contribution in a 400 meter elite athlete is probably 70 to 75. So call it up to 3/4 comes from the oxygen independence. So that's glycolysis, burning carbs rapidly in the muscle, and phosphocreatine, the creatine phosphate system. And only about 1/3 to 1/4 of the energy comes from the oxygen dependent systems. Whereas when you get to the 800s, that split is thought to be in the range of about half-half. And then the 1500, obviously, now it tilts in more in favor of the aerobic. And I think that there's a power component as well to the 400, which is why a lot of those athletes are particularly muscular and larger. You don't see that in the 800 meter athletes, although guys like Arop, for instance, are maybe a little bit closer to a 400 meter build, which is why, by the way, I've often said be interested to see how Femke Bol or some of those slighter 400 meter specialists perform in the longer distance. So yeah, it's an interesting one. And then I think what was it? Niall asked about the 815 is really interesting, because you can remember back to Cohen, Ovett, Cram, Kelly Holmes did the 815 double. There've been a few fairly prominent 815. You don't see that as much anymore, and I'm not exactly sure why. But what really surprises me is why you didn't see 1500, 5000 doubles before recently. Because that used to be really uncommon. And back in 2003, Hisham Al Garouj did it. Well, I think he came second in that. And then he won the double at Athens 204. And it's pretty interesting. Like, why would that not have happened often? Because when you watch a 5,000 meter race now at World Champs, it's very difficult to see how a 1,500 meter athlete ever loses it.
I wonder if it's Joe Warnigan made this point on Discourse, and I'm wondering if it's to do with the qualifying and the way the qualifying has changed. From 1500 upwards, there's no fastest losers and only the first certain number qualify. And it changes the early rounds, he says, because the difference between running for a qualifier and running for a time trial is huge when it comes to effort. So it might be that athletes are finding they can get through to finals a bit fresher, getting through the rounds a bit fresher. So it opens up more avenues of opportunity to sort of be able to, because we do see runners going from 15 to 10 now. I know we said that the 10 is a
Yeah.
little bit of an odd one because it's not raced very often, and it's almost like a bonus event for people. So I'm wondering if it's just that it's the format that's actually changing and giving people the opportunity. They could always do it, but physically, but they just never had the opportunity before.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It could be that. It could also be, and like, I mean, who knows? But that by the way, that would favor the 1500 meter athlete disproportionately, because it means they can get through the 5000 meter rounds with minimal fatigue. Whereas before, maybe they used to have to go out and run a really fast 5,000 qualifier in order to get through on time. So it might help them more than it helps the 10,000 meter athlete coming down. The other possibility that I think might achieve the same thing is the shoes, because everything we've heard about the shoes is that they minimize the fatigue and the eccentric damage on the muscles and the joints. And I wonder whether the carbon fiber shoes and the softer midsoles have somehow allowed the 1500 meter runners to reach those finals a little bit fresher. Because other than Al Garouge in the early 2000s, it's hard to think of others until the Ingebrigtsens of the world came along. And as I say, it's really hard to see how a 5,000 meter, 10,000 meter specialist beats a Hocker or an Ingebrigtsen. Because that finish by Hocker was at the end of a 12:58 5,000. And he's able to finish the way that he did. And that race didn't have a good Ingebrigtsen and didn't have a good Laros in it. And it's hard to see how those distance guys ever win a 5,000 against that sort of athlete moving forward. So something's definitely different. And I wondered whether it was the shoes that allow for a fatigue avoidance that never used to exist before.
The other thing throw a bit of bicarb in as well.
Yeah, it's possible that's allowing the defense of that last 200 meters. That's the difference in those 5,000 races. Would have been fascinating to see how the likes of Bekele, Gebrselassie and co would deal with the 1,500 meter speed in the races. Mo Farah used to win those 5,000s. How would he have coped against a Hocker or a Laros or a Ingebrigtsen? Would have been really interesting too. Because it could just be that we're looking at a rare event and finding a pattern that doesn't actually exist. And in 5 years' time, 6 years' time, we're looking at the same thing where your 5-10 double wins out all the time and never your 15-5. So maybe it's just a aberration and not a pattern.
World Athletics want to bring in some ultimate championship next year, don't they? So the season has an end.
I've forgotten about that. Sort of a 2-day world champs.
Yeah, so I wonder if we'll see it again. It will be interesting.
Almost certainly, because in that, if it's a 2-day thing, no one's even doubling 10-5.
No, you can't, can you? It's only so.
So it's pretty interesting. But then the other thing I did look at, incidentally, and this is just it's not really related, but I sort of was looking at it as part of the conversation, because guys started talking about 400 meters and 800 meters, dating back to 1912 up to and including David Rudish's 2012 world record, which stands to this day. There have been 29 world records. How many of those world records were set with a faster second lap than a first lap?
Well, negative split.
Yeah.
I would have said the majority.
2.
75%.
2.
Oh, totally the other way around.
Yeah,
exactly. Positive split.
Exactly.
Well, I suppose, you're going to be dying at the end, aren't you? I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought this was one of the most interesting things. So the very first world record on record was a 152, which is crazy, right? Like that's where we're sort of seeing women's 800 being within the next 2 generations. And they were said
you always say that.
Sorry, go on.
You always say that the way to run races is to run a negative split, is the optimum way to do it.
Yeah, but this is what's interesting about the 800 is it's the last event where the negative split is not optimal, which is pretty physiologically interesting. So the fastest time comes from running the first lap faster than the second lap. And that's why Wanyonyi's performance in Tokyo was so amazing, because he went through 49.27 at 400 meters, and then it looked like he was sliding backwards, and he found a faster last 100 than his 7th 100, which is unusual. Normally athletes just get slower and slower, but he found something extra there. So the first world record that we have data for is a 7-second positive split, 52 versus 59 seconds for the 2 laps. The only exceptions were 1966 and 1972. And that 1972 race was won by Dave Wattle, who many of our listeners will know. I'm sure Dennis is well aware of Dave Wattle. But he basically used to run in a white cap. And you can find footage of this on YouTube. And he runs the first lap in 52.9 and the second lap in 51.4 seconds. And that 51.4 second lap is the fastest second lap ever run in a world record in 800 meters. No one has ever run the second lap faster than that in a world record. It's happened in the Olympics. So, for instance, and some of you were noting this on Discourse, when Steve Ovett won the 1980 Olympic title, he ran the second lap in under 51. But that was off a 54.3 second first lap. So you can jog the first lap and then rip the second one. But for a world record, no one has ever broken 51.4. And between 1972 and 2012, which was 40 years, and I suppose we can add another 13 years, so in 50 years, the world record has improved by almost 4 seconds, entirely based on what happens in the first lap, not the second lap.
It's quite fascinating. I'm going to predict that Wanyoni breaks the world record running a negative split.
It'll be a physiological marvel. It'll tell us something about shoes, bicarb, and whatever else. I'm not sure.
Well, bicarb defends against that fatigue, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But then again, bicarb's been around forever.
So in theory, but I mean, for Wanyoni to do this and get closer to 100 seconds, I reckon he's got around 48.8 and then a 51.2. That would give him more or less the time, right? Yeah. Because Rudisha, by the way, was 49.3, 51.6. So no one
What we said about the 800, it's basically you're going to die. It's just when you're going to die.
Yeah, it's a fatigue tolerance test, like the 4. And I think that was the point someone was making on Discourse, is that they have the same pacing characteristic, but the energy contribution is just different enough that very few people do both. And it's a pretty interesting phenomenon.
I'm surprised at the 400, it's only about 2/3 to 75% comes anaerobically. I thought it would be more.
Yeah,
I thought you could hang on in that for a bit longer.
No, there's a fairly considerable aerobic contribution, even though you're so far above your critical, in this case, speed. So yeah, I think it's a fascinating area, and the 800-meter pacing stuff is really very interesting. Whereas, incidentally, when you look at the 10,000s and the 5,000s, they are very, very rarely set with a positive split. Almost every one of them has the fastest kilometer at the end, and the second half is faster than the first half.
That's why the 800 is crazy. It's that swap over point.
Exactly.
Yeah. Speaking of aerobic systems, do you know who's got a good aerobic system?
I do, because we prepared this, but I'll let you tell me.
It's Harry Styles.
Harry Styles.
Do you know who Harry Styles is?
Of course. We're in touch with the...
Did you know who Harry Styles was before?
We're in touch with what the kids these days are listening to, Gareth. We are in touch.
I had to ask somebody last night to give me a bit of a brief on Harry Styles. Harry Styles, anyway, he's run one of the fastest marathons ever by a celebrity, because he was also in Berlin at the weekend, but not chasing the world record. But Harry went sub-3.
It's impressive.
Harry ran 2:59.13, and you messaged me to say that's a good job of pacing if that's what he was aiming for, was for a sub-3. You don't get much closer than that.
Right, because his the way it was reported is his split at halfway was. Is that what you just said? Sorry, did I miss that?
No, his final time was 2:59.13.
Yeah, and the way that the CTS Mag are reporting it is that he went through the first half in 1:29.08. So he runs 1:29.08, 1:30.05. So he's really close. And those of you who watched that race in Berlin, the conditions were tough. It was fairly warm. Apparently his PB before that race was 3:24, so he's now a sub-3-hour marathoner, which I think is pretty good going. And it made me think, A, Harry knows how to pace, which is good. B, is he the most... if you surveyed 1,000 people and said, do you know these people, would he be the most recognizable name who's run under 3 hours for a marathon?
If I looked at the list that you've put on here, then no.
So
I think sub-3 hours. Lance Armstrong.
Yeah, probably, because Lance Armstrong's got a 2:46 from New York. So I looked this up. Gordon Ramsay, the chef's a 3:30 marathon runner. Alan Turing has a 2:46. He's the guy. He's the computer scientist, right?
Yeah.
Which made me think he's run a marathon faster than his IQ in minutes. Just a random thought. Yeah. How many people have done that, do you think, in minutes? Their marathon time is lower than their IQ.
Oh, not many.
Not many. George Bush ran a 3:44 back in 1993. Ashton Kutcher and Ryan Reynolds have broken 4 hours, and then Oprah, I think, was a 4:30 or 4:20 something, very famously did that.
All faster than me.
Yeah, and I'm not even on the list. So, yeah, I reckon Harry Styles is the fastest, the most widely known sub 3 hour marathon runner, maybe other than Lance Armstrong. But I think you overestimate how many teenage and 20-something-year-old girls and women know who Lance Armstrong is.
I probably have. I move in different circles.
Exactly.
Do you remember you and Mike did a podcast once about Taylor Swift running a marathon every night on stage?
I remember that, yeah. Runner's World did that article where they said that she could be running a marathon on stage.
Yeah. I think she ran her entire set list, which is about 3 hours, 15 minutes on a treadmill to practice her sets every we worked at a 9 minute pace. It would put it just under the 4 hour mark. So I think we should have a marathon off between Harry Styles and Taylor Swift. YouTube would go mad.
They would. We'd have to handicap it significantly, though. I know because Harry's
a big fan of this. Yeah, he's a big fan of this show. That's where he gets his pacing advice. So
I think we should have a campaign to get Harry Styles onto Discourse.
There we go. Okie doke.
Maybe he's on there under a pseudonym already. Who knows? If so,
well, he ran this under a pseudonym.
He did actually. What was it? Is that a Discourse member?
It could be. He was wearing Nike Alpha Fly 3, so.
Of course, you've got to take every advantage you can get. Anyways, good job, Harry Styles. It's pretty impressive. And it's funny, you look at the post that they did on City Smag and you're going to get the usual guy saying, oh, if you didn't have a real job and you had all the money and time in the world, of course you could do that. Come on, give the guy some credit. That's a good showing. So I think good for him to close off today's show.
Wouldn't have got him in Boston.
Oh, that's his next goal, maybe. His previous marathon was Tokyo, so he's clearly going for the majors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's it.
Yep.
And with that, Tokyo disappears over the horizon in our rearview mirrors. It's been a fun wrap-up show. Let us know what you think over on Discourse. You know what to do. Our focus now returns to the usual fare. Obviously, Mike, as I mentioned at the start here, is in Rwanda, so there's going to be a bit of cycling content. But from next week on, it's back to spotlights. Your questions, your topics of interest over on Discourse will inform that show. And, of course, what happens in the news. So we'll keep our eyes peeled and our ears open to your inputs. For now, though, thank you once again for listening. Thank you for your support. And we will speak to you all again in a week. Bye-bye.